Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Yes, we have an expanded panel today because so many people wanted to hear from this man, Dr. Aubrey Hendricks, one of the foremost theologians, scholars, really activists of our time. My father said he doesn't know anyone more brilliant than this man, and you've got to get his book, The Politics of Jesus. It will change your life. It will change how you view Jesus the Christ. It will change how you view the crucifixion. It will change how you see this Palestinian Jew who was a political revolutionary who was killed by the state. My father said if you really understood the crucifixion, you would not be walking around wearing crosses. What are we supposed to do? Wear electric chairs? He said, that's crazy.
Mhm.
So that sounds sounding just like you.
Mhm.
Dr. Aubrey Hendricks. We've got this tremendous panel joining us in this hour's University of Chicago Divinity student from the Poor People's Campaign, Ian T. Palmer. I'm so glad that you're back with us. And of
Thank you so
course,
much for having me.
we've got Mark Fancher, attorney Mark Fancher, who wanted to, he said, I've got to come back here. Of course, brilliant civil libertarian, and from the National Conference of Black Lawyers. We've got Sheila Garland from the Poor People's Campaign. Everybody here is doing the work. Indeed, Dwight McKee, the Dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project, Senior Advisor to the Reverend Dr. Cornel West, as he runs for president. Of course, he's with the National Action Network, one of the founders of Operation Push. He has been in leadership and activism for more than 6 years, almost all of his entire life. And of course, Reverend Stephen Thurston. Indeed, he is from one of the iconic preaching families in America today. Indeed, he and his family have had the pulpit of New Covenant Missionary Baptist Church for almost 100 years. Dr. King affectionately called his grandfather boy baby because they never aged, but his father, his grandfather, was one of the few ministers, Sheila Garland, in the United States who opened his pulpit to Dr. King because Dr. King was so unpopular. He could not get a pulpit. And indeed, in the last couple of years of his life, he was going to leave the movement. He said, I think I'm in the way because all the doors have been closed to me. And maybe if I fast unto the point of death and just get out of here, things can move forward. The path of a revolutionary is, it does not, it's full of stones and dangers, toils, and snares. But Dr. King is more relevant today than he ever has been. And so is this book. And so we welcome you back to the show, Dr. Hendricks. I was only going to keep him for a little while, but you know what? He had to stay because we just had so much to say. But you asked a profound question, Reverend Jeanette Wilson, Senior Advisor to Reverend Jesse Jackson, pastor of your own church. Um, what was the question that you were asking him in this Holy Week as we come into Good Friday that Dr. Hendricks said? He said that wasn't a great day for Jesus. That was the day they killed him, tortured him, and killed him. Reverend Wilson.
Well, thank you, Santita, and thank you, Dr. Hendricks. I think this book is most relevant today. And I was wondering, as you thought about the politics of Jesus, what would you say about Good Friday, the seven last words that oftentimes we hear preached all across America, particularly in the Baptist churches, the seven phrases that Jesus uttered while he was on death row, as I call it, hanging
Yeah,
as part of his execution. And I've heard pastors teach it multiple ways, but few of them look at it through the lens that I think your book would cause us to think about these seven last words.
yeah, it's interesting. Ask that way in regard to the book Politics of Jesus, because Jesus was killed for his politics.
That's right.
He wasn't killed because some folks called him the son of God. Roman Empire, in fact, they probably glad to have Negroes running around, uh, called son of God and all that, because that mean they would not be much of a threat. But what I think first has to be remembered is that he was executed as King of the Jews.
That's right.
And King of the Jews um, was a direct seditionist threat to the empire. It was saying that, later for Caesar, Jesus is king. Not only that, King of the Jews was Herod's official title, and only Rome could bestow that title. So essentially, they were by placing the placard over his head that said King of the Jews, they were announcing to the world that they were killing Jesus as a threat to the empire. That's just important context. But when we look at Jesus' last utterances, they vary throughout the Gospels. But when he says in Mark and in Matthew, "My Lord, why have you forsaken me?" that reflects um, a couple things. His deep humanity, which seems to be forgotten, um, because if we forget his deep humanity, then we lose sight of the extraordinary sense of courage and commitment it took for him to get to this place. Remember, he could have fled, he could have hidden. He didn't have to stay there and wait for this. Um, Also, though, it, it it raises a question um, uh, about the expectation of Jesus and his followers about the meaning of the crucifixion. If we really look at it clearly, it raises some questions about, um, was Jesus really convinced that this was the route that he should take, or did he just move forward by faith, hoping that he had it right in the name of God?
Hmm.
Because if not, he and his followers wouldn't have been so upset either. After he was crucified, they would have said, "Well, this was the road he had to travel to save us." But also the other thing is, it raises the question about this notion of Jesus atoning death, that he died to atone for folks' sins. Never made sense to me why God would have to torture somebody to death for the sins of other people. And in fact, Luke doesn't talk about an atoning death. Luke says it is an unfair and unjust death. Others say it's a sacrificial death, which is not the same as an atoning death. And then when you look at the Gospel of John, um, Jesus, it shows something quite the opposite, that Jesus has no doubts at all. He's almost superhuman in that he's on the cross, having been tortured for all night and day, literally. And he's cool saying, "Well, okay, now you take care of your mother there, and you all do this, you do that." It gives, again, a picture of Jesus that does not take full measure of his humanity, um, and it makes people hold Jesus up as, when he walked the earth, as being something more than a normal human being. The problem with that is that you can't follow a God. You cannot follow a son of God. And so, I mean, I'm not being totally specific on these sayings, but what I'm saying is that the sayings themselves have a theological function of how they're trying to get us to see Jesus. Personally, I think when we look at Matthew and John at his humanity, that fear comes in, that doubt comes in, that this really lifts him up higher in my estimation, because despite his humanity, despite the fact that he must have had some real questions about whether he wanted to go through with this, he did it anyway. And his talk about a transforming death. I don't accept it as an atoning death, personally, for anyone's sins. It does not make sense to me personally, not from childhood. But nonetheless, his death and the effect it had on his followers literally has changed the world, and has brought his teachings to much of the world, though many of them don't follow them to their fullest depth.
Well, I think that we should consider looking at this whole, from your politics of Jesus. It seems to me that his journey to Calvary exposed the oppression that people were living under.
Absolutely.
When you think about those, as I think about the 7 words, you had guards gambling for his garments as if he really were a king, and that that cloth that he was wearing was really worth something. I mean, throw dice while you crucify me says something about the prison industrial complex that we have today, in my opinion. And the fact that, and I may be just going off, but when you have a son hanging on a cross, giving his mother to someone, it says something about our system of caring for widows and mothers who lose children. Who do their dying children hand them over to for protection? Our system doesn't take care of these mothers who lost children. And today it's just the numbers continue to increase, whether it's in Gaza or Chicago.
Mothers and fathers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
these parents, because we're seeing these fathers carry these babies out the buildings in Gaza.
I just think after looking at your book and reading all of the way you analyze, Jesus was spending a whole lot of time demonstrating the inequities in the system that lived under.
Yeah, he was standing against structural oppression as well, because when you say Spirit of the Lord is upon me, has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, well, what's good news? To change the institutions and the policies, and he was heralding change relationships and political economy even. This is all structural change, right? Yeah. That he was also heralding.
But you know what? I know that you're going to be dealing with this text tomorrow, Pastor Thurston, and on Sunday. And you have a very, well, I would say, fortunate. I mean, your approach to the gospel is very much like what I'm hearing from Dr. Hendricks. Your comment.
So Dr. Hendricks brought up something earlier about the position of Jesus in loving neighbor, doing for neighbor as self. I wanted to jump in then, but he was flowing so well. I think one of the issues that we saw in that cultural context, as well as this cultural context that we live in, is that Jesus presupposes that we love ourselves.
Yes.
And because we don't love self or love self well, that makes it difficult for love our neighbor, and neighbor being inclusive of everybody. So when we have a problem with defining who neighbor is. Number two, we have a problem with loving self, which makes it difficult for us to carry out this charge that Christ has left for us and given to us. And that's why we see so much dereliction as it relates to our duties as Christ followers, to be like Jesus, to follow the politics of Jesus, and to push back against policy and things of that nature. And what I seek to do from the pulpit, again, is to push our people as relates to making change and transformation to focus on policy. Another area where pastors and preachers suffer and struggle and are literally ignorant about it, because they get into the rooms with politicians and then they just want to take a selfie. Or can you come to my church anniversary, instead of running their voting record and addressing policies that they're supporting and are being funded to support, call them out, rather than pushing them towards policy that will make life better for poor people and oppressed people.
But you know, you did something that in Chicago is.
I have to visit your church, Brother Thirst. Excuse me. I'm just saying, I have to visit your church, man.
Dr. Hendricks, he did something. He did something that was. You need to have him. You need to have him come and speak, and he needs to come to Columbia with you, because Dr. Hendricks, he did something that was very unpopular. And Ian, I want you to jump in after this, coming out of the Poor People's Campaign, and you too, Sheila, and you too, Mark, everybody. But why did you open your campus to the migrants? You know that people are angry about that.
Yeah.
But explain what you did. Explain what you did.
Sure. Yes, we've got a feeding program, and we feed about 150 to 200 people per week. And as I drove to the church, I would pass by a police station that was littered with the lives of people who've been shipped here on buses, dropped off, not knowing where they were in the United States of America. So I got with the team and said, let's make it available. Let's make sure we let them know that we're here to serve them. Open the campus, whatever they need. Our house is their house, because this place called the Cove is not a place where we function as us and them, but it's we around here. And I also understood the politics, as Sheila mentioned before. We had 30,000 folk without melanin in their skin. that were infused into our system, and we never heard a word about it. But the minute people who are here that have melanin in their skin, they're now a problem. And powers that be now want to position these people against black people and tell black people they taking your stuff, which was a damn lie. And I had to reverse that narrative and get our people to stop feeding into that garbage so that we could be the hands and the feet of Jesus and service the need of them, because today is them on the street. Tomorrow it could be me or any one of the members of this church on the street. And in the text of the Good Samaritan, we often see ourselves when we read that text as the Good Samaritan rather than the half-dead man on the road. And I want my people to have the mindset that I'm the half-dead man on the road, and it don't matter who helps me. I just need me. And so we often find ourselves now in the position of helping everybody that we can, and whatever resources that this church has, we are here to serve the people, not for people to serve me and lift me up. Nah, I want the people in our community and our congregation to be changed, because if New Covenant disappears today and nobody feels our absence, we've not done what Christ has called us to do.
Did you get pushback from the community?
No. You can't fight good work. And then when I come back and give them the data and the stats and pull back the propaganda and help them to see these people with color are being mislabeled because people without color got everything that they needed. Once you tell the story and tell the truth, it helps people to understand that there's a deeper issue here. There's some political agendas that are being pushed here. Democratic National Convention's coming. Let's make this progressive mayor look stupid. All of those elements were at play in what's happening with our brothers and sisters that were shipped here against their will sometimes, just not knowing. And so we just got to wrap our loving arms around them. And I'll close with this. If anyone who pushed back against me continued that conversation and couldn't just receive all of the data and facts that I was giving them, and I would challenge them, if they're Christians, to recognize that the model and the ministry of Jesus was about change and transformation. That's what we're seeking to do for the lives of these people, change them and transform them. And if you push back against change and transformation, then you're literally the Antichrist.
Yeah. Ooh, Santita, I just want to pop in because, what has been said here is just so blowing my mind. Two comments I want to make. First of all, I wanted to add that those folks that are coming from Venezuela and Cuba, let's be real about the policies of the United States in those countries. The United States is holding how many trillions of dollars of Venezuelan oil money that was earmarked to help eradicate poverty in Venezuela. And why are they holding that money captive? Because the U.S. government wants to control the oil coming out of that country. And in fact, historically, Venezuela has always connected itself since the Chavez administration with the poor people of this country, and was actually blocked for providing heating fuel for some of the poorest communities in the United States when Chavez was alive. So let's not get it twisted why the United States does not want, why they're treating these folks this way, and the optics of inviting 30,000 a month to come in, but make no provisions for them once they arrive here, number one. And I think the second comment that I wanted to make, especially with respect to this idea, because I know you guys are theologians and come from rules, but I want to speak from a political perspective. When we are propagandized every day from the media of the ruling class to think about each other in a particular way, this propaganda is extraordinarily effective. And we embrace it as if it's our own way of thinking. And it becomes part of the lexicon of our communities, and also within our institutions. I mean, just just to drill it down, I was having a conversation with my niece, who's young. She's a young woman, 30, Black woman. She says, I don't trust other women. Now, I could have said a whole bunch of other things, but what I said to her is, well, ask yourself why. Why don't you trust other women? Whose purpose does that serve? Because if we're divided from one another as women, then that means we have less power individually, and we're so busy, fighting amongst ourselves that we can't see our commonality, but we also can't see our common enemy. And it's it's these it's the power of propaganda and the narratives that we hear from almost the beginning of our lives and that we take in as part of the culture. And it's not. It's a very well organized. Just reading the history of this country, like who was responsible for establishing public education in this country. It was the Daughters of the Confederacy. If we don't know this stuff, then we don't understand why we're being so miseducated. It's not a mistake. So I appreciate the convergence of really understanding the revolutionary Jesus, right? And why it's important for us to understand this history, because it's the source and the key, I think, to our own liberation and really seeing the humanity in one another. And so I'm really appreciating this conversation, but I just wanted to interject with those 2 points.
And as I bring you on in, I want everyone, I've been sending this to people, and I'm going to send it to everybody on this show. There's something called the Tent Partnership for Refugees. And it's an NGO that is comprised of more than 400 major corporations: Red Roof Inn, Royal Farms, CSX, Delta Airlines, DoorDash, Etsy, Bloomberg, and on and on and on. And they have a memo of understanding that was signed by our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and is to expand economic opportunity for refugees. So these 1.8 million jobs that were Americans didn't get them. They were given to refugees. Think about it. Greg Abbott did not take those people who were at the border back across the border south. He dispersed them around the country so that they could go to work. We have to understand America was built on enslaved labor, and that is what they still do. The Tent Partnership, everybody, I'm going to send it to you because I read things on the right, the left, the middle, and outside. And then I said, oh, so this is what's really happening. Ian Palmer, divinity student from the University of Chicago, and of course, from the Poor People's Campaign. What are you hearing today as we're coming into this holy season?
I have to ask a scriptural question to Dr. Hendricks and also to Rev Thurston and Wilson, following everything that Sheila brought up, because I'm left just constantly thinking about how this is the time of imperial decay. This is the time where the empires that we know are falling, but they're going down swinging, that the propaganda that we face is from, the subtlest form that I swear in the United States, we're the only country or group that calls it the middle class rather than working class. And it's the most extreme of, we're talking about a rise in book banning, starting from Florida, and it's like spreading through our national politics. I have to ask, and I was going through your book that I haven't read in a while, but I want to revisit, what are we to do with Romans 13? Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except for God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Now this is coming from Paul, this is coming from the person who really spread Christianity.
Yeah.
Are we to be better Pauls? Are we to look differently to Jesus?
I'm glad you raised that. That's a very important point. Two things there. Well, one, you look at the context, and Paul is essentially, this is not one of Paul's better moments by any stretch, but Paul his concern was, remember he said, I will be all things to all people to spread the gospel. Paul's concern was the perpetuation of those various communities, and to keep them from doing things that would get them destroyed, essentially. And so what he appears to have meant by that was in a very poorly put way, was for folk to be cool and not rock the boat at that moment, to bring subjugation and homicide upon themselves. Having said that, that is something that should be ignored. You know, we have to remember, Paul was Paul. Paul wasn't Jesus, and Paul wrote letters. They were occasional letters, as you know. They were written to various communities to address what they were going through. And so, you know, for him to say, "Look, this is all authority is from God," and blah blah blah. I mean, essentially saying, "Look, you'll be cool. You get ready to get in deep trouble here, and I'm trying to keep you off from getting in trouble." Nonetheless, it is something that is so poorly said, and if he did mean it, think about Jesus on the cross being tortured to death. And he's saying, well, you know, this authority, you know, all of it comes from God, Caesar's authority. So how are you going to have the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done, on the one hand, other hand saying that Caesar's authority is from God? You see, it's so what should we do? Say that anything that contradicts the spirit of the gospel got to go. And that got to be ignored. Is that simple? That is just and let me put it to the listeners. Paul wrote letters. He didn't write scripture. He wrote letters to congregations to help them survive and make sense of what they were going through. And this letter was not it. You know, it just Paul filled out on the job on this passage, at least in this letter.
Yeah, Santita, if I can say amen to that. And I think that, you know, we have to, as Dr. Hendricks said, Paul is not Jesus. And one thing that Jesus said repeatedly is to reject the world, reject it. When they put this question to him squarely, he said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and unto God that which is God's. You know, there was no question about where he stood on this question. And I think that he really had a very complicated mission. You know, Dr. Hendricks referenced earlier the importance of recognizing the humanity of him, which was profound and which is something that if we fully appreciate, we really have a stronger relationship with him. And I think he thought that that was important. You know, I pose the question sometimes to people. I say, look, you know, when all of us as parents, when we first see that newborn, when we see that child that has come into our lives, there is immediate love for that child. It is indescribable love. It is love, and we want nothing from that child. We just love the child. As the child grows, the child gives us nothing, but we still love that child. We're prepared to give our lives for that child, everything for that child. We love that child so much. But many of us don't have that same love for God. I mean, our love for him is conditional. What you gonna give me? You know, I'm praying to you and I'm asking you to give me something. Prove something to me before I love you. And I think that God wanted a different relationship with us. He wanted us to love him without our having to expect anything from him. And so he thought that he could get that from us if he came into the world and we could see him as a person. We could relate to him as a person. And we still couldn't love him as much as we love our own children. And I think that he wanted to make a distinction between the world and his kingdom by proving to us every now and then that he controls the world. I mean, you know, the miracles were secondary in importance to him, I think. He did them occasionally to show, yeah, you know, remember who you're dealing with here. You know, I look like a man, I'm acting like a man, and I can forgive sins. I can do all of these things that God does because I am him. And if you, I'm going to do a miracle for you just to prove to you that I am who I am. And I think ultimately his resurrection was more of the same. Because look, you know, for those of you who want to think that I was just another guy, I can overcome death. And I'm here to show you that I am him.
He was just another guy. And let me tell you, he was. First of, Jesus never said he was God. He made a distinction between self and God, right? And he didn't say worship me. He said follow me, right? So I mean, and I think what I'm articulating is just a theological difference. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I think that but the scripture I think does portray him as a man. Also, I think when you say reject the world, I think you're right in that he said reject like the systems of the world, the status quo. Um, 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 but his Jesus came to change the world, not not just to reject the world. So God so loved uh, uh, the world, and so that's a very important distinction, Brother Fancher. You make some very good points, but that on that I'd like to make that distinction that Jesus, I think part of how his message gets lost is the conflation of Jesus and God, or Jesus as God, when Jesus was the Son of God, but when he walked the earth, he was the Son of Man, right? He was just a man. He was executed as a man, which is the magnificence of Jesus. Because forgive this, how this might sound flippant, but any old Son of God could have done could have done the things Jesus did. But for a man to stand like he did, and that wisdom, so is the magnificence of it. And I grew up being taught to reject the world, and there are those who take this, and I think you agree with this, the tragedy of this, they take it too far, right? There are actually sects that reject the world. I mean, they all go off by themselves, right? And they think they have their whole responsibility is to their congregation, and the whole responsibility is a vertical responsibility, just them and God, giving honor to God who's ahead of my life, but they don't do anything to help anybody on the horizontal on the horizontal level. So no, I don't reject the world. I darn sure reject what's going on in the world, like you do. I know. I mean, it is your vocation. I understand to fight injustice, and that's a godly thing. And I think that's what everybody here is about. And I applaud you activists here, because that is what we are supposed to do, Brother Fancher. I mean, why aren't you a corporate lawyer trying to line your pockets as much as possible? No, because you heard the call to love your neighbor as yourself, right? And to try to change the injustice of the world into just. Well, forgive me for getting carried away, but man, you got me worked up, brother. Thank you.
We're on the same page. You just said it better than I said.
Well, no, I don't know. We're on the same page.
I know Dr. Wilson. Okay, I'm in a room full of ministers, so I got to hold my own. Wait a minute. So I wanted to say that it wasn't until I read Karen Armstrong that I understood this whole concept of God and Jesus, and how we come to kind of understand him in the way that a lot of the population talk about him. So it was really reading Karen. Am I pronouncing her right? Karen Armstrong. She was like she grew up as a nun, a Catholic nun, but she left the nunnery and started writing about the history of God and how we've come to know. And she talks a lot about this. I'm probably going to crucify it, the Nicene, something like how they changed the concept of Jesus to get us to think about him as some son of God, and all of this thing. And it wasn't until I read her that I really began to understand this whole concept. My parents were, they're from the South, so of course they were religious, but there was always a question in me, even from the time I was a very small child, about what they were telling me. And so I was constantly questioning, and they were like, what is wrong with you? Like, you're supposed to. And so I started reading at a very young age, so I could kind of understand for myself, like, what is it that I'm being asked to believe, and why am I and where did all of these ideas come from? And I know ideas come from somewhere, because the first question I asked my mother was, when she told me that Jesus was a spirit, I said, well, who were his parents, and where did his spirit go? and try to explain that to a 6-year-old, or like, infinity and all of this other stuff. So I was a challenge, but you have to read these things to kind of gain an understanding, because otherwise, we're misled, I think. So anyway, I'm sorry, Dr. Wilson.
Dwight's been awfully quiet. That always makes me
nervous.
Yes. What do you think?
Well, I kind of want to a little in the first point is that I think one of the expected consequences of Dr. King and your father and Barbara is they made speaking truth to power vogue, and it became an aspiration for the ambitious. And so, there is a sacrifice to be had when you speak truth to power. Well, there's also an elevation that happens. And so in the land of media, you also become a hero, and there are benefits, and there is other perks that come from being on hero. You get on television and you get your name in the newspaper and you get in the history books. And so it became, again, an aspiration for the ambitious. And so what you end up doing sometimes is advocating your personal responsibility to the government. So there's a lot to be said for challenging the government to take care of the poor and to divide the resources to the poor. But to Mark's point, that does not advocate you to your personal responsibility to the poor. And so, unlike Dr. Thurston, I don't think that people don't love themselves. I think many of us love ourselves too much. And so, what happens on your personal level to the personal church is that we advocate for the government to take care of the people, while ourselves we advocate for a prosperity gospel. And so, as our neighbors get poor, many of us get richer. And so, our priorities, when you look at some of the major preachers, they are driving past people in Rolls Royces who have nothing to eat, and they're flying away in airplanes, flying over people who are starving to death. And so they've mounted themselves great riches that Jesus challenged us not to store up, as they then advocate with their personal responsibilities to the government. And so they have themselves, we ourselves, become more and more and more rich. While they
Well,
so
right? We couldn't hear you. You went out.
so we ourselves, we advocate, we become wealthier and wealthier and wealthier as our neighbors become poor and poor and poor. And so again, I think that what Jesus' great mission was to change our values. And when our values change, our priorities change. And when our priorities change, our priorities become and our brothers, I'm sorry, and the poor. And we execute both. We challenge the government to do better, but we also challenge ourselves to do better. I think that's the real challenge of Christianity, is not just, being a civil rights leader, challenging the powerful to share. It really also comes down to your own values and what you're willing to give up for the poor, what you're willing to sacrifice in behalf of your neighbor. Which is why Jesus said, don't store the stuff up in kingdoms where they can, for yourself, where they can rust. But render unto Caesar what is Caesar, unto God what is God, because God's values and priorities all become your values and your priorities.
Well, I think that's why we have to really understand even those who've been touched with the divine who are among us. Because Dr. Hendricks, The mission statement of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, my father's home organization, the organization that Dr. King founded, the organization of which your grandfather and father were members, Reverend Thurston, and you, Dwight, was to save the soul of America. I mean, this was not for blacks and whites to come together, not white children sit next to black children, next to Indians. No, no, no. It was to save the soul of America because they knew that there was something fundamentally wrong here. And it was so deep. And I'm wondering, before I pivot back to you, Dr. Hendricks, you have a Faith Under 40 ministry. Reverend Thurston, Ian, you're both young men. Do you think young people are more open to a politics of Jesus, that approach? Because it is not what they may have heard before. Because now a lot of young people go to church and they're entertained. Or they don't go.
That's what they go for, a lot of.
I've been encountering younger demographic that are into deconstruction and decolonization. And those who take that particular approach and that lens on faith and Christ and Christianity are interested in learning more about the historical Jesus and not a whitewashed, westernized Jesus. And so I'm seeing Reverend Jeanette Wilson mentioned Holy Smokes, a piece that I do where we smoke cigars and deconstruct bad theology one cigar at a time.
I'm coming.
Yes, sir.
You all saw me smoking my cigar.
Yes, sir.
They got how many million people are with you?
We got a good number of people that follow us.
10 million. I met your guy.
Yes,
ma'am. The number.
And so in those environments, yes, I'm seeing young people that want to learn about this historical Jesus, and that is making them more interested in connecting with authentic churches that are doing the authentic work of Jesus. But to the point that was made, there are a lot of churches that are just presenting an entertainment-based environment rather than doing the real work of what this faith is calling us to.
I think the reason there are more entertainment churches because back in slavery days, they continued to entertain us and make us feel that it's going to be all right. You just got to die to get there. Jesus' model, if we read the Bible and read the politics of Jesus, he was proximate to the need. What Reverend Thurston did was you had to drive to see the people. You couldn't drive past them. You had to stop and say, look at this need. How do I address it? Sometimes you can do it personally with your church. Other times you may do it with your church and you may challenge the system. You have to do better by these people. You can't just drop them in places on streets. And I think COVID showed us our churches were not doing what God called us to do for the main. There was nobody knocking on the door. The majority of our churches saying, are you going to open and let me in? Because they hadn't been coming and having their needs met in many places before. So I think that when Jesus saw the man that had been by the pool 38 years, he could have kept going like everybody else did. He stopped. Man, what's wrong with you? Get up. Nobody ever told a man to get up. Nobody ever looked at him other than with disdain. Like we see homeless people just say, I don't know why they out here begging me, and go through all of that negative. He said, just get up, take up your bed and walk.
Yeah.
When he was feeding the 5,000, it wasn't like go to a restaurant, tell them to feed these people. He said, do we have any food here? That's what we have got to begin to do is be proximate to the need and address the needs.
Ian?
I have to say that I think for a lot of the appeal for younger people is trying to work maybe backwards from a lot of the secularism, and a lot of that is through going from work and then to the lessons. I think in today and today's age of anxiety, and just all of the cataclysm all around, is that a lot of young people are interested. I mean, seriously, genuinely interested in doing good work in their community. A lot of topics like and complicated topics of justice, like restorative justice, moving away from abusive criminality, and imprisoning folks just left and right, but actually working toward resuscitating and revitalizing people's lives has a lot of its roots in Christian and spiritual work that is being left to a lot of young activists. And as what Reverend Wilson and what Rev Thurston were saying is that I think there's some confusion on churches that are looking to fill seats in their church by being entertaining, but it's because leadership there doesn't want to go out and do the work when they actually have an audience, when they have people who want to do well and are doing well, but they're not being led morally in that sense. And I think there's a lot to be said for doing the work first and then walking people down that path.
Well, I just have a few minutes left, and I want Reverend Hendricks, Dr. Hendricks, boy, you have kept. I've not had Mark Fancher for 2 hours ever, but he's always there when I need him. And but there's something about your message. And I'm just yanking your chain, Attorney Fancher. But I mean, really, because there's something about this message that's so refreshing, and it's so uplifting, because I've seen Mark go into law, really doing godly work. I've seen Reverend Thurston in the pulpit just really questioning the church and what are we doing? Wait a minute, y'all, we're missing the point. You're missing the boat. I mean, because bringing these migrants onto your campus in Chicago, where we see all of the tension, that's not a popular thing to do. But then your grandfather did that with Dr. King. It wasn't a popular thing to do. So you're in that tradition. Ian Palmer, the Poor People's Campaign, Sheila Garland, the Poor People's Campaign, you're doing the work. These are the wretched of the earth. We don't want to deal with them. And I don't mean what Fanon was talking about. I mean really the wretched of the earth, and the great unwashed. Right, McKee does that work and has been doing it forever. So the last 5 minutes belong to you, because I mean, what did you say? Good Friday wasn't a great day.
No.
For Jesus.
It wasn't a good day. It wasn't a good day for Jesus. And but I'd like to just address quickly some points that he made, which were really important points, talking about radical individualism and all that. The biblical witness is about the common good. It's always must be about the common good. There's no the ethos of the Bible, other than some of the later New Testament books, is not at all individualistic, right? But radical individualism and self-love are not necessarily the same thing. We could be a radical individualist and be one of the worst people in the world. It doesn't mean that you love yourself. In fact, it means you don't really love yourself. I think it means what Jesus portrayed as love. And Brother Thurston, this is something that your point was, when Jesus talked about loving our neighbors, and which implied loving ourselves, it had to do with the other point that Reverend McKee made, with this revolution of values. Really embracing this value of social justice, fighting for the common good being the basis of our life together. And so I think if we leave off with any, if there's any one point I would want people to have about Jesus and about the gospel was the core of the gospel. Jesus says the greatest commandments: love your Lord your God, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself, which is holistic spirituality. And we see that reflected in the Gospel of Luke, the 4th chapter, beginning of the 1st verse. Jesus was out in the wilderness, and he was struggling with spiritual ministrations, meditation, contemplation, silence, fasting, on down the line. Spiritual ministrations to prepare himself to do what? To be able to say, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. And that is the core of the gospel, reflected in Matthew 25:31-46. As you have not done it for the least of these, you have not done it for me. And it doesn't say anything about what you believe, what your gender is, who you love. What it says that the measure of our judgment is how we treat people in the world. And that's not individualistic. That's being concerned with the common good, seeing everybody as our neighbors. That's the core of the gospel, I think. And that's what we should be really lifted up in this Holy Week, that Jesus died fighting for these principles, and for teaching these principles, and for trying to lift folk up. Very quickly, John 6, the feeding of the 5,000. Remember, they wanted to make him king. Why? Because rather than going to Jerusalem on the eve of the Passover and getting an offering like this, like traditional, these folks came out to Galilee, where Jesus was. They left the temple, came out to the country, and received an offering from Jesus. And he changed the whole way that we look at political economy. Rather than being in debt to God and fearing God and all that, we see God as a God of gift, and that we're the fact that we are, and the gift is love for one another to make this a better world. So thank you all. I've been really honored with the brilliance of everybody in this panel, man. Y'all, and I got a new church I got to visit, and out in Chicago. But thank you all so much.
Covenant. Well, you know, the politics of Jesus, everybody. I hope that this has blessed you as this book has blessed me down through the years. It is a blessing. The politics of Jesus. This really will open your eyes and help you to understand who Jesus was. I don't know what your faith is, or if you are in or out of faith, but we have to learn how to love ourselves. We have to learn how to love each other. We have to know that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. We just have to change our minds and make it happen. We have everything we need right here, everybody. Everything we need is right here. Everything but a changed mind. Everything but a renewed spirit. So in this resurrection season, as we come upon Resurrection Sunday, may God bless you. I hope that this conversation has been a blessing to you, Dr. Aubrey Hendricks. Thank you for your anointing. Thank you for all of your work, everybody. We love.
Oh my gosh. Oh, this was amazing.
We love him.
This was amazing.
It's amazing. It's amazing, everybody. So please like and share this show and get the politics of Jesus. May you be blessed. May you be blessed real good, real good in this resurrection season. God bless everybody.
God bless.